What is the biggest lie your wife told you? Jenna and I met at my cousin's wedding 7 years ago. She was the photographer's assistant and kept making me laugh during the formal photos. We talked all night at the reception, and I knew she was different. She wanted the same things I did. Big house in the suburbs, stable careers, and most importantly, a huge family. I told her on our third date that I wanted at least 4 kids, maybe 5. Always dreamed of coaching little league teams and having chaotic Christmas mornings with kids everywhere. She said she wanted the exact same thing. Said she came from a big family and couldn't imagine life without a house full of children. We got engaged after a year. During wedding planning, she'd always point out the kids at venues we toured, saying how she couldn't wait for ours to run around our own reception someday. She'd joke about needing a bigger car for all the car seats, even had names picked out. We bought a 5-bedroom house right after the wedding. She insisted on the extra bedrooms for all the kids we'd have. Spent weekends painting the rooms neutral colors so they'd be ready. Her Pinterest was full of nursery ideas. She'd send me articles about the best school districts and signed us up for a waiting list at a good daycare. 3 years into marriage, we started trying. She tracked everything on apps, took vitamins, made us follow all the advice from pregnancy books. Every month she'd take tests and act disappointed when they were negative. She'd cry and I'd comfort her, promising it would happen soon. After 8 months, she suggested I get tested. Said maybe something was wrong and we should rule it out. I went to 3 different specialists. Every single test came back perfect. The doctor said I had excellent counts and motility. When I came home with the results, excited that at least we knew I wasn't the issue, Jenna was sitting on the couch with tissues. I thought she was upset about another negative test. Then she said we needed to talk. She told me that when she was 22, before we met, she had severe endometriosis. Had to have surgery that removed most of her reproductive system. The doctor told her she'd never have children naturally. Her chances were basically 0. She'd known for 8 years. The entire time we'd been together. Every conversation about kids, every nursery we planned, every name we picked out. She knew. When I asked why she never told me, she said she thought it wouldn't matter once we were married. That I'd love her enough to not care. That adoption was just as good. She actually said she thought I was being shallow for being upset. I asked about all the trying, the ovulation tracking, the pregnancy tests. She said she wanted to make it look real so I wouldn't suspect anything. She'd been faking disappointment for months. Taking pregnancy tests she knew would be negative. Crying fake tears while I held her. The fertility vitamins she'd been taking were just regular vitamins she'd put in a different bottle. When I said I needed time to process, she got angry. Said I was being dramatic and that lots of couples adopt. When I reminded her that I'd been clear about wanting biological children from day one, she said people change their minds all the time. She actually tried to schedule an adoption consultation the next day, like nothing had happened. Her mom called me that night, saying Jenna told her I was being unreasonable. That I should be grateful Jenna was willing to adopt, since some women wouldn't even do that. Her sister texted saying I was disgusting for making fertility a deal breaker. Her whole family acted like I was the villain. I moved into the guest room. Jenna kept trying to act normal. Made my favorite dinners, bought tickets to concerts, and scheduled couples' vacations. When I said I was thinking about divorce, she lost it. Said I'd be throwing away 6 years over something that didn't matter. Those kids were kids regardless of biology. That I was selfish for wanting to abandon her over a medical condition. I asked her if she ever planned to tell me. She said she was going to after we'd been married longer, and it would be too late for me to leave. She actually said that she wanted to trap me first. She'd researched my state's divorce laws and figured after 10 years, I'd be less likely to leave because of asset division. She had a timeline for when to tell me the truth. I filed for divorce the next week. She tried everything. Claimed she didn't know about her infertility when we met, but I had texts where she'd mentioned having surgery years before. Said she thought she might still get pregnant miraculously, but her medical records showed the doctor's notes saying it was impossible. Then she tried to claim I was discriminating against her for a disability. Her lawyer actually laughed at that one. But what she brought to the court the next day changed everything. The courtroom went completely silent. Jenna's lawyer placed a thick folder on the table in front of the judge. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched him open it slowly. The judge looked down at the contents, then back up at the lawyer with raised eyebrows. He asked what new evidence they were presenting. I had no idea what she could possibly have. We'd been through everything already. Her medical records proved she knew about her infertility. The texts I had showed she'd mentioned the surgery years before we met. Morgan leaned over and whispered that we should request a recess to review whatever this was before proceeding. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was concerned. The judge nodded and granted a 30-minute recess. Morgan and I stood up and moved toward the door. Jenna's lawyer followed us out with copies of the mystery evidence. We walked down the hallway to a small conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as we sat down at the scratched table. Jenna's lawyer handed Morgan the folder without saying anything. His expression was smug, like he thought he'd just won the case. Morgan opened it and started flipping through the pages. His jaw tightened as he read. I leaned over to look, and my heart sank. The folder was full of printed screenshots. My social media posts from the past 3 years. Text messages with friends, all of it carefully selected and arranged. I saw a post where I'd joked about passing on my genes, another where I'd commented about wanting kids who look like me, a text conversation with Austin where I'd said something about genetic traits. Every single one was taken out of context. They made me look obsessed with having biological children to an unreasonable degree, like I cared more about DNA than love. Morgan immediately recognized what this was: a character assassination attempt. He started going through each screenshot methodically, pointing out how the context had been deliberately removed to distort my meaning. We spent 20 minutes examining every page. One text message showed me joking with a friend that at least my kids wouldn't inherit my terrible eyesight. In the full conversation, I was actually making fun of myself for needing such strong glasses. But Jenna's lawyer had cut off everything before and after. It looked like I was obsessed with genetic perfection. Another post showed me commenting on a friend's baby photo, saying the kid had his dad's nose. Normal stuff people say all the time. But isolated like this, it looked weird and fixated. Morgan made notes on each page, documenting the missing context and what the full conversations actually said. His pen moved quickly across his legal pad. When we returned to the courtroom, everyone was already seated. Jenna sat at her table staring straight ahead. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying during the break. Morgan stood up and addressed the judge. He systematically went through each piece of evidence, providing the full context for every screenshot, highlighting how the editing was deliberately deceptive. The judge's expression changed as Morgan talked. His eyebrows drew together, and his mouth formed a thin line. He looked increasingly annoyed as it became clear that Jenna's team had wasted the court's time with manipulated evidence. Morgan pulled up the actual social media posts on his laptop, showed the full threads and conversations. The difference was obvious. What looked obsessive in isolation was completely normal in context. I felt relief wash over me, but also anger that Jenna would stoop to such obvious manipulation tactics. The judge leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. He stated firmly that wanting biological children were not unreasonable or discriminatory, that the issue at hand was the 8-year deception, not my stated family preferences. Jenna's lawyer tried to argue that I was being inflexible and cruel to someone with a medical condition. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. He said medical conditions don't justify deliberate long-term deception in a marriage. I saw Jenna's face crumple as she realized her dramatic evidence had backfired completely. Her shoulders shook, and she put her face in her hands. The judge dismissed the evidence as irrelevant and manipulative. He said he'd seen enough and would issue his ruling within 2 weeks. Court was adjourned. After court, Morgan and I walked back to his office 3 blocks away. The afternoon sun was bright and hot. Morgan explained that Jenna's failed evidence stunt actually strengthened our position. It demonstrated ongoing manipulative behavior and bad faith in the divorce process. We sat down in his office and he pulled out his calendar. He recommended we push for a faster timeline since Jenna had shown she'd continue escalating tactics. I agreed immediately. I wanted this nightmare to end as quickly as possible. Morgan said he'd file a motion to expedite the proceedings. He thought we could have everything finalized within 2 months instead of the usual 6. That evening, Viviana called to check how court went. I told her about Jenna's manipulated evidence disaster. She was furious on my behalf. Her voice got loud and sharp as she talked about how manipulative the whole thing was. She said this proved I made the right decision to leave. Someone who truly loved me wouldn't try to destroy my character in court. Her support helped counter the guilt I still sometimes felt about ending the marriage. 2 days later, I received a long email from Chloe. The subject line said we need to talk. I opened it at work during my lunch break. The email was full of emotional manipulation, begging me to reconsider the divorce, claiming Jenna was devastated and not eating, saying I was destroying her daughter over something that wasn't her fault, how cruel I was being to punish someone for a medical condition. Every paragraph was designed to make me feel like a monster. I read through it once, then forwarded it to Morgan without responding. I knew engagement would only make things worse. Morgan called me an hour later. He'd read the email and wasn't surprised. He said he'd handle it with a formal response. Within a day, Morgan sent a formal letter to Jenna's attorney. The letter stated that all communication must go through legal channels, that family members contacting me directly was inappropriate during divorce proceedings. He also noted that if the harassment continued, we'd seek a restraining order to prevent interference from other people. The letter was professional but firm, establishing clear boundaries that couldn't be crossed. I started meeting with the financial advisor Morgan recommended. His office was in a tall building downtown with a view of the city. The advisor was an older man with gray hair and a calm manner. He explained the full implications of dividing our assets and selling the house. I'd take a significant financial hit from the divorce, losing about half the equity we'd built up plus legal fees. But he said I was young enough to recover financially. The house we bought for an imagined family now felt like an expensive monument to lies. He showed me spreadsheets and projections, numbers that represented the end of everything I'd planned for. I signed the papers authorizing him to start the asset division process. Walking out of his office, I felt exhausted but also lighter, like I was finally moving forward instead of being stuck in the past. The real estate agent showed up right on time the next Tuesday morning. She was older, maybe late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a professional blazer. I let her in, and she started taking notes on her tablet immediately. We walked through the living room first, then the kitchen. She made comments about the updated appliances and good natural light. I nodded along without really listening. When we got to the second floor, she opened the first bedroom door. The walls were painted pale yellow. We'd spent a whole weekend on that color 3 years ago. I remembered standing in the paint aisle with color samples while she insisted on getting the exact right shade for a nursery. The agent walked in and looked around. Her eyes lingered on the yellow walls longer than necessary. She didn't say anything, just made more notes on her tablet. The second bedroom was light green. Another weekend project. Another lie. The agent glanced at me with this expression that was trying hard to be neutral, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. She knew. Maybe not the details, but she could tell these were supposed to be kids' rooms. We moved through the rest of the house quickly. She took measurements and photos. When we got back downstairs, she pulled up some comparable sales on her tablet. Houses in our neighborhood were selling fast. She suggested listing within 2 weeks once I had my belongings packed and moved out. I agreed and signed the paperwork authorizing her to handle the sale. Packing started the next day. I took time off work to get it done. The first room I tackled was my home office. That went fast since it was mostly just my stuff. Books, computer equipment, files. I filled boxes methodically and labeled them. The bedroom came next. Clothes, shoes, personal items. I left everything that was hers untouched. By the third day, I'd cleared out most of my things from the main living areas. That's when I had to deal with the spare bedrooms. The yellow room first. I opened the closet and found stacks of baby name books. At least a dozen of them. Some had sticky notes marking pages. I pulled one out and flipped through it. She'd circled names, written notes in the margins about which ones she liked. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the floor with the book in my lap. Every single page was a lie. Every circled name was part of the act. I found a folder tucked behind the books. Inside were printed Pinterest boards, nursery designs, crib styles, wall decorations, page after page of plans for children that would never exist. Plans she knew would never happen. I kept digging through the closet like I couldn't stop myself. Found another folder with preschool brochures, application forms for daycare programs, a binder full of articles about child development and parenting tips. She'd maintained this entire fake future right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. I sat there surrounded by evidence of her lies for probably an hour. Each new discovery made it worse. This wasn't just about not telling me. She'd actively built this elaborate deception. Bought books, printed materials, created a whole false reality. I finally stood up and started throwing everything into trash bags. All the books, all the printouts, all the plans. I didn't want any of it in my new place. My phone rang while I was hauling the trash bags down to the curb. It was Austin. I answered, and he asked how the packing was going. I told him I was getting through it, but it was rough. He said some family members had been asking him questions about the divorce, wanting to know why I was leaving and if there was any chance of reconciliation. He'd been deflecting and defending my decision, but he admitted there was drama brewing. Some relatives thought I was being too harsh, that I should have tried harder to make it work, that medical conditions shouldn't end marriages. I leaned against the garage door and closed my eyes. Of course people were talking. Of course they had opinions about something they didn't understand. Austin said he told everyone it was complicated and not really their business, but you know how family gets. I appreciated him having my back. Told him I couldn't control what other people thought about my choices. I knew I'd made the right decision for myself, and that had to be enough. He agreed and said he'd keep running interference with the family gossip as much as he could. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, then hung up. The next weekend, Viviana showed up with her truck to help me move into my new apartment. It was across town in a building I'd never been to before. Small, 2 bedrooms, nothing like the house. We loaded boxes into her truck and made 3 trips. The apartment felt tiny compared to what I was leaving behind. The living room barely fit a couch and TV stand. The kitchen had about half the counter space. My bedroom was okay, but the second bedroom was barely bigger than a closet. Viviana tried to stay positive while we unpacked. Kept saying things like I could decorate however I wanted now without having to compromise, that I could make it my own space, that it was a fresh start. But we both knew this wasn't what I'd pictured at 31. I was supposed to be in that big house with kids running around. Instead, I was in a cramped apartment with an empty second bedroom that would probably just become storage. We got most of the boxes unpacked by evening. Viviana ordered pizza, and we sat on my new couch eating straight from the box. She asked if I was doing okay, and I said I was managing. She squeezed my shoulder and said it would get better eventually. I wanted to believe her. At work the following week, I couldn't focus on anything. Sat at my desk, staring at spreadsheets without actually seeing the numbers. Missed 2 deadlines. Forgot about a meeting completely until someone came looking for me. My boss noticed. He pulled me into his office on Thursday afternoon and asked if everything was all right. I hesitated, then told him I was going through a difficult divorce. Kept it brief and professional. He nodded and said he understood these things were hard. Then he mentioned the company had an employee assistance program that included counseling services. I hadn't even thought about that. He said I should take advantage of it if I needed support. Gave me the contact information and told me to take whatever time I needed to get things sorted out. I thanked him and went back to my desk. Looked up the employee assistance program on the company website. They covered up to 6 therapy sessions per year at no cost. I bookmarked the page. I called the number that evening and scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. The therapist's office was in a medical building downtown. I showed up 15 minutes early and filled out intake paperwork in the waiting room. When she called me back, I followed her to a small office with 2 chairs and a couch. She introduced herself and asked what brought me in. I started explaining about the divorce, about finding out my wife had lied for 8 years about being able to have children, about how she'd faked trying to get pregnant, about the betrayal. The therapist listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said my anger was completely valid, that what happened was a serious violation of trust. She explained that I wasn't just grieving the end of my marriage, I was grieving the loss of my imagined future family, the children I'd planned for, the life I'd built in my head. She said that was real grief, even though the children never existed. Talking to someone neutral who didn't judge my decision to leave felt like breathing for the first time in months. She didn't try to convince me I should have stayed. Didn't say medical conditions should be overlooked, just validated that the deception was wrong and my feelings made sense. We scheduled another appointment for the following week. Morgan called me at work 3 days later. Said he had news about a settlement offer from her attorney. The financial terms were actually reasonable. House sale proceeds split evenly. Retirement accounts divided fairly. We each keep our own vehicles and personal property. But there was one clause that made my blood boil. They wanted me to make a public statement saying the divorce wasn't due to her infertility, that it was mutual and amicable, that her medical condition played no role in the separation. I told Morgan absolutely not. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative like that. The divorce was absolutely about her lies, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to make her look better. Morgan said he figured that would be my response. He'd counter with the same financial terms but remove the speech requirement completely. I agreed and we hung up. She lost it when her attorney told her I was rejected the clause. My phone started blowing up with text messages. Long paragraphs accusing me of trying to humiliate her publicly, saying I was cruel and vindictive, that I wanted everyone to think she was defective, that I was punishing her for something she couldn't control. The messages got more unhinged as the day went on. I read the first few, then called Morgan. He told me to stop reading them immediately. Forward everything to him without responding. Don't engage at all. I did what he said. Forwarded about 15 messages to his email and then muted her number. The texts revealed someone spiraling, someone desperate to control how others saw the situation, someone who still didn't understand that the problem wasn't her infertility, but her lies. 2 weeks later, the mediator assigned to our case scheduled a joint session. The appointment was set for a Thursday afternoon at his office downtown. I was anxious about seeing her face to face for the first time since I'd moved out. Morgan prepared me thoroughly the day before, went over what to expect, told me to stay calm no matter what happened. Speak only when directly addressed. Let him handle all the negotiations. Don't respond to emotional appeals or accusations. Just sit there and let him do his job. I barely slept the night before. Kept running through possible scenarios in my head. What she might say, how I'd react, whether I could keep my composure. The mediation room was small and uncomfortable. Conference table with chairs on both sides. The mediator sat at the head. Morgan and I took one side. She came in with her attorney and sat across from us. She looked terrible. Eyes red and puffy. Hair not styled like she usually kept it. She wouldn't look directly at me. The mediator started by explaining the process and ground rules. Then her attorney jumped in immediately. Started arguing that I was being vindictive and unreasonable. That I was punishing her for a medical condition she couldn't control. that the divorce was cruel and unnecessary. She started crying while he talked, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Morgan stayed completely calm. He pulled out a timeline he'd prepared, went through every major event in our relationship. When we met, when we got engaged, when we got married, when we started trying for kids. Then he asked her directly when she planned to tell me the truth if I hadn't discovered it myself. She didn't answer, just cried harder. Her attorney tried to redirect, but Morgan pressed the question. The mediator's expression shifted. I could see him starting to understand what actually happened here. That this wasn't about discrimination against someone with a medical issue. This was about 8 years of calculated deception. Her attorney tried redirecting the conversation, but Morgan pressed harder. He asked when she planned to reveal the truth. She didn't answer, just cried louder into her tissues. The mediator leaned forward and asked the question again. She mumbled something about waiting until we'd been married longer. Morgan pulled out printed text messages where she'd discussed her surgery years before we met. He asked how she could claim she didn't know when her own medical records showed detailed surgical notes. Her attorney looked uncomfortable. The mediator's expression shifted from neutral to understanding. He saw through the victim narrative she'd been building. Morgan methodically walked through every major conversation we'd had about children. When I'd told her on our 3rd date I wanted 4 or 5 kids, when we'd toured the 5-bedroom house, when she'd insisted on painting the extra rooms, when she'd suggested I get fertility tested. Each point hammered home the calculated nature of her deception. The mediator took notes. Jenna's crying intensified. Her attorney tried arguing about medical privacy, but Morgan countered that privacy doesn't extend to deceiving your spouse about fundamental life goals. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. The mediator called for a 15-minute break. Morgan and I stepped into the hallway. He told me things were going better than expected. The mediator clearly understood this wasn't about discrimination against a medical condition. Jenna's manipulated evidence backfiring had actually strengthened our position. He suggested we push for a settlement today if possible. I agreed. I wanted this nightmare over. We stood near the water fountain discussing asset division details when I saw Jenna emerge from the conference room. She walked toward me with her attorney trailing behind, looking alarmed. Her face was blotchy and red. She opened her mouth to speak. Morgan immediately stepped between us. He reminded everyone that direct communication wasn't appropriate during mediation. She looked desperate and broken. Her hands shook. For a second, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered 8 years of calculated lies. The fake pregnancy tests. The fertility vitamins that were just regular vitamins. The 10-year timeline she'd researched before planning to tell me the truth. The pity evaporated. The mediator appeared in the doorway and called us back inside. We returned to the conference room. The mediator outlined his observations. He noted the clear evidence of long-term deception. He acknowledged my stated desire for biological children wasn't unreasonable or discriminatory. He suggested we focus on practical asset division rather than fault or blame. Jenna's attorney agreed quickly, probably recognizing their position had weakened significantly. Morgan nodded. The mediator proposed splitting everything down the middle. House sale proceeds divided evenly. Retirement accounts split according to state law. Each of us keeping our own vehicles and personal property. We spent the next 3 hours hammering out details. Who got which furniture pieces? How to divide the joint savings account? What to do about the wedding gifts from both families? Every item felt like another piece of our failed marriage being dissected. Jenna barely spoke. Her attorney handled most of the negotiation. I let Morgan make the decisions. My brain felt foggy from exhaustion and stress. The mediator drafted preliminary terms. Both attorneys reviewed the language carefully. We made minor adjustments to a few clauses. By 6 o'clock, we'd reached an agreement. The house would go on the market immediately. Proceeds split 50-50 after paying off the mortgage. My retirement account divided with her getting her legally entitled portion. Her retirement account split the same way. We'd each keep our own cars. I'd get the living room furniture. She'd get the bedroom set. Kitchen items divided based on who actually used them. The mediator printed copies for everyone. Both attorneys said they'd formalize everything within a week. I signed my name feeling exhausted but relieved. Real progress after months of nightmare. Walking to my car, I felt lighter despite the emotional drain. Morgan clapped my shoulder and said we'd done well today. The settlement was fair and reasonable. No judge would have given us better terms. He'd get the formal paperwork drafted and filed within days. The divorce could be finalized within 2 months if everything went smoothly. I thanked him and drove home to my small apartment. The place felt empty and depressing after the spacious house. I ordered takeout and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed with a text from Viviana asking how mediation went. I told her we'd reached a settlement. She responded with celebration emojis and offered to take me to dinner this weekend. The real estate agent listed the house 3 days later. Professional photos made the empty rooms look bigger and brighter than I remembered. The listing emphasized the 5 bedrooms and great school district, everything we'd chosen specifically for raising a large family. The irony burned. Within a week, we had multiple offers. The market was hot for family homes in good neighborhoods. A young couple offered asking price with minimal contingencies. They had a toddler and were expecting twins. The agent sent photos of them touring the house. The woman's hand rested on her pregnant belly while pointing at the rooms we'd painted neutral colors for future nurseries. I signed the acceptance paperwork feeling sick. Watching their excitement about the extra bedrooms felt like being stabbed repeatedly. They talked about turning one room into a playroom. Another would be the twins' nursery. The third would be ready for future kids. Everything I'd dreamed about with Jenna, everything she'd known would never happen. The closing was scheduled for 30 days out. The agent said it should go smoothly since they were pre-approved and motivated. I thanked her and hung up. Viviana called that evening and I told her about the sale. She said it was good to sever that final tie to Jenna. I agreed, but my voice sounded hollow. The closing happened exactly on schedule. I met the buyers briefly at the title company. They were nice people, genuinely excited about their growing family. The woman showed me ultrasound photos of the twins unprompted. I smiled and congratulated them while dying inside. We signed stacks of paperwork. The title agent explained each document. My hand cramped from signing my name so many times. When everything was finished, the agent handed me a check for my half of the proceeds. The number was substantial but felt meaningless. I'd traded my dream of a family home for a pile of money I didn't want. I drove straight to Morgan's office and wrote him a check for his legal fees. He'd earned every penny getting me through this nightmare. The remaining money went into my savings account. My financial advisor scheduled a meeting to discuss next steps. She helped me set up a new investment plan focused on rebuilding individual financial security. Everything was sensible and practical. Everything felt empty. That night I sat in my apartment staring at the bank balance on my phone. More money than I'd ever had before. Less happiness than I'd felt in years. My therapy appointment the next week was rough. I admitted I was struggling with whether I'd ever trust anyone enough to try for a family again. The therapist listened while I explained my fear that this experience had poisoned my ability to believe what partners tell me. How could I ever take someone at their word about wanting children after Jenna's 8-year deception? The therapist reminded me that most people don't engage in such calculated long-term lies. She acknowledged my trust would take time to rebuild. We worked through exercises about distinguishing between healthy caution and letting fear control my future. She asked what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years. I said I still wanted kids, still wanted to coach Little League and have chaotic Christmas mornings. The dream hadn't changed just because Jenna had lied about sharing it. The therapist pointed out that holding on to that dream while working through trust issues was actually healthy. It meant I wasn't letting Jenna's betrayal destroy my fundamental desires. We discussed strategies for eventually dating again. How to have early conversations about life goals. Red flags to watch for. Ways to verify someone's honesty without becoming paranoid. I left feeling slightly more hopeful, but still scared. Austin called the following Saturday and invited me to a family barbecue. I hesitated. Some relatives would definitely have opinions about my divorce. Austin promised to run interference if anyone got judgmental. I reluctantly agreed to go. The barbecue was at his parents' house, my aunt and uncle's place with the big backyard. Kids were running around playing. Couples stood together chatting. I felt painfully alone. I grabbed a beer and found a quiet corner. Within 20 minutes, an aunt cornered me. She suggested I'd been too hasty ending things. Medical issues shouldn't destroy marriages. People work through worse problems all the time. I took a breath and explained politely but firmly that deception destroyed my marriage, not infertility. That Jenna had lied for 8 years about something she knew was fundamental to me. That trust was the foundation of marriage, and she'd shattered it completely. My aunt looked skeptical. She said something about forgiveness and commitment. I excused myself before the conversation escalated further. I walked to the other side of the yard and stood near the fence. Other relatives probably thought the same thing. That I was being cruel and shallow. That I should have stayed and adopted. They hadn't lived through the calculated lies. Viviana appeared beside me holding 2 beers. She handed me one and said she'd noticed my aunt cornering me. She'd been watching for judgmental relatives. We stood together in comfortable silence for a minute. Then she said some family members would never understand my decision. Their opinions didn't matter because they hadn't lived through Jenna's betrayal. They hadn't watched me discover 8 years of my life were built on lies. They hadn't seen the fake pregnancy tests or the research timeline for when to finally tell me the truth. Her fierce loyalty meant everything when I felt isolated by others' judgment. She stayed close the rest of the afternoon, steering me away from potentially difficult conversations, changing subjects when relatives asked intrusive questions about the divorce, making jokes to lighten the mood when things got tense. By the time I left, I felt grateful for her support. She walked me to my car and hugged me. She said I'd made the right choice and she was proud of me for standing firm, that I deserved someone honest who actually wanted the same future. I drove home feeling less alone than I had at the start of the day. Morgan called Monday morning with news. The final divorce hearing was scheduled 6 weeks out. He explained it should be straightforward since we'd reached settlement on all major issues. The hearing was mostly procedural to finalize everything legally. He didn't anticipate any surprises since Jenna's dramatic evidence stunt had failed so badly. The judge would review the settlement terms, ask if we both agreed, sign the final decree. The whole thing would take maybe 15 minutes. I marked the date on my calendar with mixed feelings of relief and sadness. That evening, I made the mistake of downloading a dating app. Several friends had suggested getting back out there, meeting new people, not letting Jenna's betrayal keep me isolated forever. I created a profile, swiped through potential matches. A woman named Olivia messaged me. She seemed nice. Normal job, normal hobbies, normal life. We chatted for a few days. She suggested meeting for coffee. I agreed even though my stomach twisted with anxiety. The date was polite but awkward. I spent the entire evening comparing her to Jenna, wondering if she was being honest about wanting kids someday, analyzing every word for potential deception. Olivia talked about her job teaching elementary school. She mentioned loving kids and wanting her own family eventually. I should have felt encouraged. Instead, I felt suspicious. Was she telling the truth or just saying what she thought I wanted to hear? How would I ever know for certain? She asked about my divorce and I gave a brief explanation. She was understanding and kind. That made me more suspicious. Nobody was this perfect and honest. I was a mess. The date ended with an awkward hug. She texted later saying she'd had a nice time. I felt guilty telling her I wasn't ready for anything right now. She deserved someone who wasn't broken. My therapist wasn't surprised when I told her about the failed date attempt. She said I was putting too much pressure on myself to move forward quickly, that I needed more time to process grief and rebuild trust before jumping into new relationships. She recommended focusing on rebuilding my individual identity rather than searching for a partner, taking dating completely off the table for at least 6 months while I worked on healing. I agreed immediately. The relief was instant. Permission to not be ready. Permission to take time without feeling like I was wasting my life. We spent the rest of the session discussing goals for the next 6 months that had nothing to do with dating or relationships. I started focusing more on work as the weeks passed. The divorce stress was still there, but not as heavy as before. Projects that seemed impossible to concentrate on became manageable again. I met deadlines without constantly checking my phone for lawyer updates. My boss stopped by my desk one afternoon and mentioned I seemed sharper lately. He said he appreciated my dedication during a tough time and knew it hadn't been easy. His words meant more than he probably realized. Having someone acknowledge the struggle without making it awkward felt good. I threw myself into a big presentation for a client meeting, spent extra hours refining the details and practicing my delivery. When the presentation went well and the client signed on for another year, I felt proud of something for the first time in months. Work became a refuge where I could prove I was still capable and valuable despite my personal life falling apart. My inbox showed a new email from Chloe late one evening. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. The tone was completely different from her previous angry messages. She apologized for how she'd reacted before and said she understood I was hurt. Then she asked if we could meet in person to discuss Jenna's well-being. She wrote that Jenna was struggling badly and barely leaving her apartment. I stared at the email for 10 minutes trying to figure out how to respond. Part of me felt bad that Jenna was suffering. The other part remembered 8 years of lies and manipulation. I forwarded the email to Morgan before replying. He called within an hour and said meeting Chloe was a terrible idea. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, and any contact with Jenna's family could complicate things. He reminded me that Chloe had called me unreasonable and cruel just weeks ago. Her sudden change of heart was probably a strategy to get me to reconsider. I drafted a short response declining the meeting, kept it polite but firm, suggested she focus on getting Jenna professional help instead of involving me. Hit send before I could second-guess myself. Morgan called 3 weeks before the final hearing with a minor issue. Jenna's attorney wanted to modify the settlement regarding furniture from the house sale. Apparently, she wanted the dining room table and chairs plus the bedroom set from the guest room. I didn't care much about those pieces. The dining table reminded me of family dinners we'd never have. The guest room furniture just made me think of the months I slept there after discovering her lies. Morgan asked if I wanted to fight it or just agree. I told him to let her have the furniture. It meant more to her than to me, and fighting over chairs seemed pointless when we'd already divided everything else. He said he'd handle the paperwork and get it sorted quickly. The concession felt small compared to avoiding more conflict and delays. I just wanted the divorce finished, so I could move on with my life. Saturday afternoon, I drove to an open house in a neighborhood I'd been researching. The listing showed a 2-bedroom condo with updated kitchen and a small balcony. Walking through the empty rooms felt strange after years of planning for a 5-bedroom house full of kids. The real estate agent talked about the building amenities and low maintenance fees. She showed me the 2nd bedroom and mentioned it made a great home office. I nodded but didn't tell her I'd been picturing it as a nursery just months ago. Another couple walked through looking excited and discussing which room would be the baby's room. I left quickly after that. Visited 2 more properties that afternoon. Each one was smaller and simpler than what I'd imagined for my future. The shift from family home to single-person condo was depressing but necessary. I wasn't ready to buy anything yet. Just looking helped me picture a different future that didn't include Jenna or the family we'd never have. Drove home feeling tired and sad, but also slightly more prepared for whatever came next. Austin texted asking if I wanted to grab lunch on Tuesday. We met at a sandwich place near his office and caught up on work stuff and family news. Then he mentioned he'd run into Jenna at a coffee shop downtown the previous week. My stomach tightened immediately. He said she'd asked about me and seemed genuinely sad and regretful. He kept the conversation brief and didn't share any details about my life. Said she looked rough and clearly struggling. Her hair was messier than usual, and she had dark circles under her eyes. I felt a weird mix of sympathy and anger hearing this. Part of me didn't want her to suffer even after everything she'd done. The other part thought she was facing consequences of her own choices. She'd lied for 8 years and tried to trap me in a marriage built on deception. I was suffering consequences of her lies too. Austin said he wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, just wanted me to know in case I heard it from someone else. I appreciated him telling me directly. We finished lunch talking about his kids and upcoming vacation plans. Normal conversation that didn't revolve around my divorce felt refreshing. My therapy session that week introduced a new concept that helped me process the complicated feelings about Jenna. The therapist explained acceptance without forgiveness. I could acknowledge that Jenna was suffering and struggling without excusing what she did or reconciling with her. The two things weren't connected. Her pain didn't erase her actions. My boundaries didn't require me to hate her or wish her harm. I could recognize she made terrible choices that hurt both of us, while still maintaining firm boundaries about our relationship being over. This framework made sense of the confusing emotions I'd been experiencing. Not wanting her to suffer didn't mean I was wrong to leave. Feeling sympathy sometimes didn't mean I should reconsider the divorce. I could hold both truths at once. She was struggling, and I felt bad about that. She also lied to me for 8 years, and I made the right decision leaving. The therapist said this kind of nuanced thinking was healthy and showed emotional growth. I left the session feeling clearer about my feelings than I had in weeks. 2 weeks before the final hearing, I had a breakthrough during therapy. We'd been discussing why the pain felt so overwhelming even months after discovering the truth. The therapist asked me to list everything I was grieving. I started with the obvious answer, which was the marriage. Then she pushed me to be more specific. I realized I was grieving multiple losses at once. The marriage itself, the imagined future family with 4 or 5 kids, 8 years of my life spent building something fake, my ability to trust people easily. Each loss was separate and significant. Naming them individually helped me understand why I felt crushed under the weight of it all. I wasn't just sad about one thing. I was processing 4 or 5 major losses simultaneously. The therapist said recognizing this was an important step toward healing. Each loss needed to be grieved separately instead of treating them as one big mass of pain. We spent the rest of the session breaking down each specific loss and what it meant to me. By the end, I felt exhausted, but also understood myself better. Morgan called to confirm everything was ready for the final hearing. All paperwork was finalized and prepared for the judge's signature. He walked me through what to expect during the court appearance. We'd both be asked if we agreed to the settlement terms. The judge would review everything and sign the final decree. The whole process would take maybe 15 minutes. He reminded me this was mostly a formality at this point, since we'd already resolved all the contentious issues. I felt surprisingly calm listening to him explain the procedure. Ready for the legal chapter to close, even though I knew emotional healing would take much longer. The divorce would be official soon. That felt both relieving and sad at the same time. Viviana called that evening and offered to come to the final hearing for moral support. I accepted immediately. Having family there who understood and supported my decision would make facing Jenna one last time feel less scary. She promised to take me out for dinner afterward to mark the end of this chapter. Said we'd celebrate me moving forward with my life. I appreciated her support more than I could express. She'd been there through the worst of it, and never judged me for my decision. Her presence at the hearing would remind me I wasn't alone, even when everything felt overwhelming. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling thinking about the past 7 years with Jenna. Remembered our wedding day when she stood across from me promising honesty and partnership. How she'd smiled and cried happy tears while making vows she was already violating. Every good memory was tainted now by knowing it was built on lies. Our first apartment together where we'd talked about baby names, the house hunting trips where she'd insisted on extra bedrooms, all those weekends painting rooms for children she knew we'd never have. The fake disappointment every month when pregnancy tests came back negative. Tests she knew would be negative because she'd been infertile for years. I thought about how thoroughly she'd violated her wedding vows from the very beginning. The betrayal still stung intensely despite months of therapy and processing. Finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. Woke up exhausted, but ready to face the final hearing and close this chapter of my life. The judge entered the courtroom right at 9 a.m. Everyone stood as she took her seat behind the bench. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Viviana sat 3 rows behind me, and I could feel her presence like an anchor. The judge adjusted her glasses and opened the file in front of her. She reviewed the settlement agreement for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 minutes. Then she looked up at both of us. She asked if we each understood the terms outlined in the divorce decree. Morgan nodded at me and I said yes in a voice that came out steadier than I expected. The judge turned to Jenna and her lawyer. Jenna's voice shook badly when she answered. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. The judge asked if there were any final objections or modifications either party wanted to raise. Both lawyers said no. The judge signed the papers with quick, efficient movements. She stamped the decree with an official seal. Then she stated that our marriage was legally dissolved effective immediately. The whole thing took 12 minutes according to the clock on the wall. 8 years together, 6 years married. Ended in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode. The judge wished us both well and dismissed the court. Morgan shook my hand and said congratulations. I didn't feel like celebrating anything. Walking down the courthouse steps felt surreal. The sun was too bright and the air felt too normal for what had just happened. Viviana caught up to me and linked her arm through mine. She didn't say anything at first, just walked beside me toward the parking lot. My legs felt heavy and my chest felt tight. I thought I'd feel relief or freedom or something positive. Instead, I just felt empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left a hollow shell walking around. Viviana squeezed my hand when we reached her car. She told me healing wasn't a straight line, that it was okay to feel sad even though I knew divorce was the right choice, that complicated emotions were normal and healthy. I nodded but couldn't find words to respond. She drove us to a quiet restaurant across town, somewhere we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I stared out the window the whole drive and watched normal people doing normal things, going to work, walking dogs, living their lives like my world hadn't just officially ended. Viviana ordered for both of us because I couldn't focus on the menu. The waiter brought water and bread, but I couldn't eat. She started talking about practical things to keep me grounded, asked about my job and whether I'd thought about taking vacation time, suggested I might want to visit somewhere new, get out of town for a week, see something different. Then she shifted to bigger topics, asked what I wanted to do with my career long term, whether I'd ever considered moving to a different city for a fresh start. I told her I didn't know, hadn't thought past getting through the divorce. She reminded me I was only 31, that I had plenty of time to rebuild everything, to find someone honest who actually wanted the same things I did, to have the family I'd always dreamed about. Her confidence in my future felt alien, like she was talking about someone else's life. But her words planted tiny seeds of possibility in the wasteland inside me. Maybe someday I could believe in that future too. Just not today. Over the next 3 weeks, I told people the divorce was final. Started with close friends who already knew most of the story. They were supportive and offered to hang out whenever I needed company. Then I told extended family members in careful phone calls. Most responded with sympathy and understanding. A few made comments that stung. My uncle said I should try to move on quickly and not dwell on the past. My aunt suggested I might regret leaving once the anger faded. A cousin implied I was being too rigid about the biological children thing. Each comment felt like a small cut. These people didn't understand the depth of what Jenna had done. They saw a man leaving his wife over infertility, not a man leaving because his wife had lied about fundamental life goals for 8 years. I learned to keep explanations brief and change the subject fast. Stop trying to make people understand who didn't want to. I called my therapist's office and scheduled an appointment for the following week. The receptionist asked if everything was okay, and I said I just needed a check-in after finalizing my divorce. When the appointment day came, I felt nervous walking into her office. Like I was admitting I still needed help even though the legal battle was over. She welcomed me warmly and asked how I was feeling about everything being finalized. I told her about the empty feeling, the lack of closure I'd expected, the complicated grief that didn't match what I thought I should feel. She nodded like she'd heard this before, said my reaction was completely normal and healthy. That closure was a myth people invented to feel better about endings. Real life was messier than that. She suggested we shift our focus going forward, spend less time processing what Jenna did, and more time rebuilding my ability to trust. working through my fears about future relationships, learning to recognize red flags earlier. I agreed to keep coming for at least 6 more months, maybe longer if I needed it. The work wasn't done just because the marriage was. Austin called on a Thursday evening while I was making dinner, said he had news but wasn't sure if I'd want to hear it. I told him to just say it. He explained that Jenna had moved back to her hometown 3 hours away, wanted to be closer to her parents during this difficult time. She'd quit her job here and found something similar there. My first reaction was pure relief. The knot of anxiety I'd been carrying about running into her at the grocery store or the gym just dissolved. I hadn't fully realized how much mental energy I was spending on avoiding certain places and routes. Austin asked if I was okay with him staying in touch with her occasionally, since they'd been friends before I met her. I told him I didn't care what he did, wasn't going to police his friendships. He thanked me for being reasonable about it. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen feeling lighter than I had in months. The physical distance made everything feel more final, more real, like we were actually separate people living separate lives now. My boss called me into his office on a Monday morning. I assumed I was in trouble for my distracted performance over the past months. Instead, he told me about a senior position opening up, asked if I'd be interested in applying. The role came with more responsibility, managing a small team, handling bigger projects, but also a significant raise and better benefits. He said he'd been impressed with how I handled personal challenges while maintaining professionalism, that he believed I was ready for more. I accepted on the spot. Spent the next week preparing for the formal interview process, working on my application and presentation. When I got the official offer 2 weeks later, it felt like the first genuinely good thing to happen in forever. Proof that my life could move forward in positive ways. That I wasn't just treading water waiting to drown. I called Viviana first to tell her. She screamed with excitement and said this was exactly the kind of momentum I needed. We celebrated with dinner at my favorite restaurant. I started looking at condos online during lunch breaks. The apartment I'd moved into after leaving the house was temporary, small, and depressing. I wanted something that felt like mine, a place with no memories of Jenna attached. I found a nice 2-bedroom unit in a good neighborhood. The price fit my budget, especially with the raise. The second bedroom could be a home office for now, somewhere to keep my books and computer. But in the back of my mind, I thought about how it could be a nursery someday, if I was lucky enough to meet someone trustworthy and build that future. The thought didn't hurt as much as it used to. I scheduled a viewing for that weekend, walked through the empty rooms imagining my furniture there, my things on the walls. The realtor was friendly and professional. Didn't ask why a single guy wanted 2 bedrooms. I submitted an offer that evening. Felt like I was reclaiming control over my life direction. The seller accepted my offer 3 days later. I called Viviana immediately, and she offered to help me pick out furniture and decorations. We spent the next weekend at furniture stores. She had strong opinions about everything and kept me from buying things just because they were cheap. Pushed me to invest in pieces I'd actually like living with. We picked out a comfortable couch, a real bed frame instead of just a mattress on the floor, kitchen table and chairs, artwork for the walls. She made me choose colors and styles that reflected my actual taste, not what Jenna would have wanted. The whole process felt therapeutic, like I was building a version of home that was entirely mine. No compromise or shared decisions, just my space designed exactly how I wanted it. Moving day was set for 3 weeks out. I counted down the days with actual excitement instead of dread. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat in my therapist's office for our regular appointment. She asked how my week had been, and I realized I'd gone several days without thinking about Jenna at all, without feeling that spike of anger when something reminded me of the lies. The realization surprised me enough that I stopped mid-sentence. My therapist smiled and said that was significant progress, a sign I was genuinely moving forward instead of just going through motions. She reminded me healing wasn't linear, that I might still have bad days or setbacks. But the fact that I could go multiple days without the pain being front and center meant I was building a life beyond the betrayal. I left that session feeling cautiously hopeful, like maybe I could actually believe in a future that wasn't defined by what Jenna had done. The empty feeling was still there sometimes, but it was getting smaller, making room for other things. Better things. Austin and Viviana showed up at my apartment early on moving day with coffee and boxes. They helped me load everything into the rental truck and drove across town to the new condo. Carrying furniture up the stairs felt good. Physical work that made me focus on something concrete instead of spinning thoughts. Viviana directed where everything should go while Austin and I hauled the heavy pieces. The couch fit perfectly in the living room. The bed frame went together without any missing screws. My books filled the shelves in the second bedroom that would be my office for now. We worked for hours getting everything in place. Viviana unpacked kitchen boxes while I assembled furniture. Austin hung pictures on the walls wherever I pointed. By evening, the place looked like an actual home instead of empty rooms. They ordered pizza, and we sat on my new couch eating straight from the box. Viviana raised her soda can in a toast to fresh starts and new beginnings. After they left, I walked through the quiet space, touching the walls and furniture. Everything here was mine. No shared decisions or compromises. No memories of Jenna attached to any of it. That night, I slept in my new bedroom on clean sheets, in a room I'd picked out myself. The silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. No anger keeping me awake. No what-ifs running through my head. Just quiet and calm, and the feeling that maybe I could actually build something good here. 3 weeks later, I attended a work conference downtown at a hotel convention center. Boring presentations about industry trends and networking sessions where everyone made small talk. During the lunch break, I grabbed coffee from the lobby cafe and nearly collided with someone coming around the corner. She apologized and laughed, said she wasn't paying attention. I recognized her vaguely from another department. Kira something. We ended up sitting at the same table since all the others were full. She asked how I was enjoying the conference. I admitted it was pretty dry. She agreed and said she was only there because her boss made her come. We talked about work stuff at first, different projects our departments were handling, office politics and difficult coworkers. Easy conversation that didn't require much thought. Then she mentioned she was recently divorced and still getting used to going to work events alone. The comment caught me off guard. I told her I was divorced too, just finalized a few months ago. Her expression shifted to understanding. She said it was rough navigating everything after a marriage ended. All the small things that reminded you your life had changed. I nodded and said I was still figuring it out. She suggested we grab coffee sometime outside of work. Said it might be nice to talk to someone who understood what this transition felt like. I agreed without overthinking it. She seemed genuine, and the idea of a friendship with someone who got it sounded helpful. We exchanged numbers before heading back to the afternoon sessions. Kira and I started meeting for coffee every couple of weeks, usually at a place halfway between our apartments. She talked about her divorce openly, how she'd married too young and they'd grown apart, how she'd dated too soon after the split and made mistakes with guys who weren't ready for anything serious. She was honest about her trust issues now, about being scared to get hurt again. I shared bits about my situation, the deception, the feeling of having 8 years stolen. She listened without judgment or unsolicited advice, just nodded and said that sounded incredibly painful. Our conversations covered other topics too. Hobbies and weekend plans, books we were reading, shows we were watching, normal stuff that had nothing to do with failed marriages. The friendship felt easy and healthy. No romantic tension or expectations. Just two people rebuilding their lives and supporting each other through it. She made me laugh about stupid dating app stories. I helped her pick out furniture for her new apartment. It was exactly what I needed. Someone who understood this weird in-between phase without making it complicated. Austin's birthday party happened 6 months after my divorce was finalized. He threw it at his place with a bunch of friends and family. I almost didn't go. Social events still felt draining sometimes. But Viviana texted saying I needed to show up or she'd drag me there herself. So I went. Walked in expecting to feel out of place or awkward. Instead, I found myself actually having fun. Talking to people without that constant weight in my chest, laughing at Austin's terrible jokes, playing cards and drinking beer and not thinking about Jenna every 5 minutes. Several people commented that I seemed more like myself. Lighter somehow. One of Austin's friends said I looked happier than I had in years. The observation surprised me. I hadn't realized how much the stress had been showing before. How much better I must look now by comparison. I wasn't completely healed. Still had bad days where everything felt heavy. But standing in Austin's living room with a beer in my hand, genuinely enjoying myself, proved I was getting better. The pain wasn't gone, but it wasn't defining every moment anymore. I could have fun again. Could be present without the anger and hurt coloring everything. That realization felt huge. At my next therapy appointment, I brought up the idea of dating again eventually. Not right away, but someday. My therapist asked how that made me feel. I admitted I was terrified. Scared of being lied to about something fundamental again. About wasting more years with someone who wasn't honest. She helped me think through questions I could ask early in relationships. Ways to establish compatibility and honesty from the start. We talked about green flags versus red flags. About trusting my instincts when something felt off. She reminded me that most people don't engage in years-long deceptions. That Jenna's behavior was extreme and not representative of everyone. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think I could eventually trust someone enough to try building a family. She said I didn't need to rush anything. That taking my time to heal properly would make future relationships healthier. I left feeling more prepared. Like I had tools now to protect myself while still staying open to possibilities. The fear was still there, but it felt more manageable. 2 months later, my boss called me into his office. I walked in expecting some routine update or new project assignment. Instead, he told me I was promoted to senior director, a position I'd been working toward for 3 years. He said my dedication over the past difficult year had been impressive, that I'd maintained excellent work despite obvious personal struggles. The team respected my leadership, and he believed I was ready for more responsibility. The promotion came with a significant raise and better benefits. I thanked him, trying to keep my voice steady. Walked back to my desk feeling stunned and proud. The professional success felt like concrete proof I was rebuilding successfully. My personal life had exploded, but my career was thriving. I'd kept showing up and doing good work even when everything else was falling apart. That meant something. I called Viviana during lunch to tell her. She screamed with excitement, said this was exactly the momentum I needed. We celebrated with dinner at my favorite restaurant that weekend. Viviana called me on a Sunday afternoon a few weeks later, asked if I could come over because she had news to share. I drove to her place wondering what was up. She and her husband were both grinning when I arrived. She told me she was pregnant with their second child, due in 7 months. I felt genuine happiness for her, even though it reminded me sharply of what I didn't have yet. The family I'd planned for that never happened. She watched my face carefully, said she'd been nervous to tell me given everything with Jenna. I assured her I was truly happy for them, that my situation shouldn't diminish her joy. She hugged me tight and said I'd have my own family someday with someone who deserved me, someone honest and real. I appreciated her sensitivity and her faith in my future. Drove home feeling bittersweet but not bitter. Their happiness didn't take anything away from me. I could be glad for them while still grieving my own losses. Nearly 8 months after the divorce, I sat in my therapist's office for our regular session. She asked about my week, and I realized something. I hadn't checked Jenna's social media in weeks, maybe a month. Hadn't wondered what she was doing or if she was dating anyone new. Hadn't thought about her at all for days at a time. The realization surprised me enough that I stopped talking mid-sentence. My therapist smiled and said that was a major milestone, a sign of genuine emotional detachment and healing. I'd been so focused on active recovery that I hadn't noticed the passive progress. The way Jenna had stopped occupying space in my daily thoughts. She reminded me healing wasn't linear, that I might still have setbacks or hard days. But the fact that I could go extended periods without the pain being front and center meant I was truly moving forward. I left that session feeling proud, like I'd accomplished something significant without even trying. The work I'd been doing was paying off in ways I hadn't fully recognized. Kira mentioned during one of our coffee meetups that she had a single friend who might be a good match for me. A teacher named Olivia who was straightforward and kind. She asked if I'd be interested in meeting her at a group outing. Nothing heavy or formal, just a casual thing with several people. I felt nervous immediately. The idea of potentially connecting with someone new brought up all my fears about being deceived again. But I recognized this was a healthy, low-pressure way to start opening up. Kira wouldn't suggest someone who wasn't decent, and a group setting meant no pressure or expectations. I agreed before I could overthink it. Kira looked pleased and said she'd set something up for the following weekend. After we said goodbye, I sat in my car feeling anxious but also proud. The fact that I was willing to try felt like real progress. Like maybe I was actually ready to start moving toward the future I wanted. The group outing was at a bowling alley. Casual and fun with about 8 people total. Kira introduced me to Olivia right away. She was warm and friendly with an easy smile. We ended up on the same team and talked between turns. She taught 4th grade and loved it despite the chaos. Asked about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. We talked about our lives without getting into heavy divorce details. Just normal getting to know you conversation. She mentioned wanting to travel more and asked about places I'd been. I found myself relaxing as the evening went on, actually enjoying getting to know her without the constant anxiety about being lied to. She was straightforward in a way that felt refreshing. No games or hidden agendas that I could detect. When the night ended, she suggested we grab coffee one-on-one sometime. I agreed, feeling cautiously hopeful. Drove home thinking maybe I could do this. Maybe I could trust someone new eventually. It would take time and careful steps, but it felt possible. Like the future I'd always wanted might still happen with someone honest and real. I grabbed coffee,